It is 8 p.m. Central. It is Thursday Night Tide right here on the YouTube and podcast homes for BamaOnline.com. Travis Reier alongside team expert, Mr. Clint Lamb. We're going to get you through the first 25 minutes or so of tonight's program. Then we'll be joined by Jimmy Stein coming up around 8:25, and we'll go with Jimmy and Clint, the trio, kind of a three-man weave here from 8:25 to 8:35, and then Jimmy and myself to round things out from 8:35 till 9. You are welcome to jump on board with your comments and questions. And with that, Clint, we kind of talked about this in the pre-show. I've got my Jags taking on Tim's Saints while we're doing this, and the Jags just scored again to go up 14-3. But if for some reason it just sort of goes radio silence on this end, just how, you know the deal. You just jump in and take over, right?
Is there any gentleman's bet going on between you and Tim?
There should have been, and we didn't really do that. I think it's just, I think bragging rights sometimes are enough,
They are.
bragging rights are enough. And speaking of which, Tennessee, Alabama, cigars on the line this week. And I got to think, after going without for the first time since 2000 and gosh, 6, that was the last time Alabama before last season didn't get to taste those cigars in the post game after a win over the Tennessee Vols. I got to think even Nick Saban, who said earlier in the week, not a big cigar guy, he'll chew on one. But I think even Nick might be relishing the return of the cigar after this one.
It's incredible what, you go 15 years without losing. You lose one, and all that trash talk that's been flowing one way for a decade and a half starts flowing the other direction a little bit. And it's amazing how quickly everybody had talked about, is Tennessee really an Alabama rival at this point? A rivalry is supposed to include at least a little bit of back and forth. Well, it's very quickly turned into that. Not only did they win last year, but there are some people who feel like Tennessee has a pretty good shot of winning on Saturday. So I will say this. I'm sure Alabama fans would love to win 60-0 every time they play Tennessee from now until the end of time. But at least it makes the game more interesting, and it's supposed to be, and it's supposed to be fun because it's a rivalry.
Yeah, exactly. And in many of those games in that 15-game win streak for Alabama, the games just really weren't competitive. I guess you could go back to 2009 with Terrence Cody and Rocky Block in Tuscaloosa as being one of those rare exceptions. 2015 was sneaky tight. That was a 1914 Alabama win in Tuscaloosa. And that could be the kind of game, Clint, that we're in store for on Saturday in Tuscaloosa. I think when we look at the predictions that you compiled of our BOL staff, for the most part, it seemed like if Alabama can get to the mid 20s in this game, at least that's my feeling. And I think your score sort of reflected that too. That's been the sweet spot for Alabama, especially in SEC play, I guess, other than Mississippi State. But get into the mid 20s with that defense, and you feel pretty good with that home crowd at your back, being able to maybe restore some order on the third Saturday in October.
Yeah, it's incredible what a year can do, right? Because last year it's 52-49. It's offense all over the place. Nobody can stop anybody. And, that's a different style of football game than what we're expecting on Saturday. You got two very different quarterbacks in there who are not as experienced, even though Joe Milton has, plenty of experience by this point. And, Jalen Milroe at the same time, too. He's now got, a handful of starts under his belt where he's got a lot more experience. He knows what he's doing a little bit more. But yeah, mid 20s to me, just on a surface level, with the way both defenses are playing, I feel like that's going to be enough. Now it could creep up into the high 20s, low 30s. Who knows? It could be another 52-49 for all we know. This season I felt like this season more than any in recent memory, maybe ever for me at least, has been so difficult to gauge just what you're going to get on a week in, week out basis. And so I'll be curious to see what we get out of Alabama on Saturday, but we are expecting a good game regardless.
Yeah, a very competitive game is to be expected. I think a physical game too. You think about the explosiveness of both these offenses, and really for Alabama, that exists in the passing game. We did see a few more explosive types of runs from Alabama against Arkansas last week. Certainly needed to see more of that from the Alabama offense, but for the most part, you're thinking Jalen Milroe and his receivers. Meanwhile, for Tennessee, in sort of a 180 from a year ago, it's going to be more about the Vols' run game, and especially a guy like Jalen Wright, who you look at the last few games, especially against Texas A&M last week, 8 runs of 10 yards or more. So if you're thinking about a to-do list for the Alabama defense, those splits, those wide receiver splits, all that stuff is important. The tempo that Tennessee works at, but to break it down maybe to its most fundamental level for Deontay Lawson and Justin Aboigbe and Tim Keenan and some of those big guys up front, it's going to start with dealing with that Tennessee rushing attack.
Yeah, and I think Alabama's run defense is even better than the numbers reflect, because you've seen Alabama in certain situations, the third and mediums, the third and longs, where teams have elected to run the football, catch Alabama off guard. And that's where, especially Mississippi State, that's the big one that comes to mind. They caught Alabama off guard on multiple occasions, and that's where a pretty decent chunk of their yardage has come from. Playing the run straight up against this Alabama defense, or playing, or trying to implement a rushing attack, it's very difficult to do. Alabama's interior defensive front has been very effective. Their edge guys, that was a big question mark for me going into the season. I thought, as good as Will Anderson was as a pass rusher, with Dallas Turner and Chris Braswell both being very good in that area as well, I thought trying to replace Will Anderson, the run defender, would be a much more difficult task for the edge guys. And I give Dallas Turner and Chris Braswell a lot of credit. They at least Braswell beefed up about 15 pounds to 255. That seems to have helped him set a better edge a little bit more consistently. And Dallas Turner, he's always had the traits and the ability to do it. It's just doing it on a more consistent basis. And I think both guys have really improved. So it's going to be a fun matchup to watch for sure.
It puts to test the approach that Alabama takes this week to defense, because Tennessee does work at such a fast rate and a pace on offense, an offense that really wants to get this thing to 70 plus plays on offense for Tennessee, with that hurry up, that fastball approach, as Nick Saban refers to it. And really, a key number within that is probably 50 runs. You really need to be able to keep Tennessee to fewer than 50 rush attempts in the game, because if they get to 50 plus, Clint, that means in all likelihood they're having enough success to stick with the plan and not put too much on Joe Milton and that depleted receiver core after the departures of guys like Cedric Tillman and Jalen Hyatt, and then the injury to Brew McCoy this season. If you're Alabama, as crazy as this may sound to some Crimson Tide fans, after the way in which the Vols lit up the Alabama defense through the air a year ago, you want to make Joe Milton throw the football 30, 35 plus times in this game.
Yeah, if you're an Alabama fan, just from if you're trying to become familiar in what you should expect Alabama's defense to want to do in many ways, it's how would you want an opposing defense to attack Alabama's offense? You want, if you can, force Jalen Milroe to throw 30 to 35 times. And I will say that when you are on the road like Tennessee is going to be, the communication becomes that much more critical, especially when you're going tempo. And when you look at Tennessee and what they've done on the road, I mean, you look at Georgia last year, you look at South Carolina, you look at Florida this year. When they've been in tough, hostile environments, that tempo, trying to communicate at a very quick pace, and there's a lot going on, you're dealing with crowd noise, it can really hinder your ability to do that efficiently and effectively. And so I think that the crowd could end up playing a critical, be a critical piece in this football game. That's certainly something to look out for as well.
Yeah, you want to get Tennessee out of its comfort zone, get some pre-snap penalties mixed in here. Get Tennessee in 1st and 15, 2nd and 12, more of those long yardage situation. And I say that, but I also understand, I think, and you touched on some of this earlier, and I think it's valid, the points that you made. 17 runs of 10 yards or more the Alabama defense has given up in 4 conference games so far. That's pretty good. I mean, 4 or so a game, that's not bad for a defense. 9 of those came against Mississippi State in that game you mentioned earlier. And 6 of those came on second and third and long situations. And I agree. Mississippi State kind of found themselves in a situation with Alabama leading and taking command of that game. If you're Alabama, you're protecting against the big plays, probably more so through the air. But we've also seen Texas. We've seen other offenses. Arkansas, a little bit last week, was able to do it. Sort of goofy foot Alabama when it's in its pass rush personnel, and when it's thinking more about getting after the quarterback and maybe getting out of some gaps and exposing itself to some runs. And that's what I'm expecting too from Tennessee on Saturday. I think second and long, third and long, as much as you may want to get after Joe Milton, you're going to have to still honor the run. And I think personnel is going to be very interesting too. I know you track this stuff for us extensively at BamaOnline.com. But when you open possessions against an offense that works at the speed like Tennessee's does, you got to make some choices that essentially could span the entire possession. You got to be ready to go with a group that from the first play of the possession through the last, you're okay with being out there. And when I say that, with Tennessee's ability to run the football, are you going to be more big nickel to open some possessions? Are you going to be more with 2 outside linebackers on the field in that nickel package? And I think the point you made about Chris Braswell is an important one because he is up to 250, 255. So he's equipped in a way probably even better than Alabama was a year ago to handle those situations if that's the path you choose to take.
Well, I wonder how much the USF game was kind of a blueprint for how Alabama could attack this game defensively, because for a majority of the year, they've gone in that heavy big nickel, as far as the main package that they deploy against USF, because they knew there would be a lack of substitution opportunities. They wanted to go with more balance, which, they felt like they could get more as far as their pass rush by having 2 outside linebackers on the field along with 2 defensive linemen. And they felt like they could still stop the run effectively enough. Against Tennessee, it's a little bit different because they have been so effective running the football. And when you look at last year, they kind of let Alabama pick its own poison, right? I mean, it was all a numbers game based off of what Alabama was trying to put in the box versus what they weren't. If they were going, trying to go too high looks, getting guys out of the box to maybe cover the pass a little bit better, Tennessee was such an effective run team, an underrated rushing team last year, that they just hammered the football and they were getting, 5 or 6 yards pretty much at will. And so that entire game, they lived in second medium, second short, and that continues to leave your playbook wide open. And so I thought that was a major factor in how last year played out as far as Alabama giving up 52 points. And it's something that, I'll be curious to see if Tennessee's able to do that, how Alabama attacks, like you mentioned, with the front personnel. Do they continue to, if Malachi Moore is unable to play, do they kind of continue to use the personnel to dictate who plays star? Or if
Malachi can go, do you just look at Terrion Arnold and Kool-Aid McKinstry and say, look, you got to man these guys up? This isn't Cedric Tillman. This isn't Brew McCoy. This isn't Jalen Hyatt. This is Squirrel White. All due respect, this is Ramil Keaton, who has struggled with some drops from time to time this season for Tennessee. A lot of heat on Joe Milton, but his receivers haven't always helped him either. Is that what you think you challenge those corners with if Malachi can go?
I think so, because I think you're in a much better position with where Terrion Arnold is at as far as his growth and development, and where Kool-Aid is at as far as being viewed, maybe not as a pure lockdown corner, but as close to that without necessarily being labeled as that as you could probably get. So you've got 2 potential day 1 draft picks out there on the perimeter, and Alabama's defense typically has been fairly confident in leaving their, perimeter corners on islands and letting them go to work a little bit. And so I could totally see that being the approach. Now, granted, and this might be a critical point for Tennessee, if they can take advantage of that early in the football game and force Alabama out of it, that would, certainly help open things up with the run game and things like that. So I could see, Tennessee trying to take a couple of early shots and get Alabama to kind of have to respond, which is exactly what they did last year. They did a great job of forcing Alabama to kind of stay on its heels. And that, that ended up playing a huge factor in how that game played out. This year, it's a much different look as far as what Tennessee as effective at. They still want to do some of the things they did last year. They just don't have the ability necessarily. But yeah, that's certainly a great point.
Yeah, you think Tennessee in the last 2 games in the series, man, Alabama has lit up the scoreboard, scoring 101 points or like 150 almost in the last 3 games. But in the last 2 games, Tennessee in the first quarter has scored 35 points. Had the lead in each of the last 2 games after the first quarter. So the fast start for the Vols, I don't think it's been as much of a thing this year, but with Hendon Hooker and those receivers that Tennessee had the previous 2 seasons to go along with that run game, you better show up to the park ready to go. Everyday American, as we'll check in, Clint, with some comments and questions here from our viewers. If the offensive line can block, we can have a great game. Yeah, I think everyday American, that's a reasonable expectation. And I think everyday American is referring to those struggles that Alabama has had from time to time. I thought it was important for Alabama in a game in which it should have run the ball effectively last week, Clint, that it did that. Still had the sack issue, still got that elephant in the room, so to speak, at left tackle. But those backs for Alabama, the 4 backs over 200 yards rushing in the game. With Tennessee, it is a defense that thrives on negative plays, has some unquestionable playmakers and James Pierce Jr. and Aaron Beasley and those guys across the board, really. But when you think about this offensive line, is it still just left tackle that you look at that you have your biggest concern about, or do you even look at the interior as Seth McLaughlin sort of picked up his play there at center? What about Jaden Roberts stepping in there at right guard? Seems to solidify some things as well.
Yeah, it's so interesting. When you get to what is considered what has been considered your third string guy at right guard, that should come with the level of liability that the left tackle position has been at times this year for Alabama. Like Alabama should right now have 2 major concerns on their hands as far as how opposing defenses can attack them and apply pressure on Jalen Milroe. I'll give Jaden Roberts a ton of credit because has he been great? No, but he's been serviceable enough, more than serviceable enough. He's been an effective run blocker. He's held up fairly well in pass protection where you don't look at him and say, that is a liability and that's a major problem. I don't think Tennessee is looking at him and saying, we're going to be able to get consistent success against this guy by attacking him and doing some different things. I think with the left tackle, that's a little bit of a different question or a different approach if you're Tennessee. But Jaden Roberts, certainly give him a lot of credit. And, Seth McLaughlin, from a blocking standpoint, I haven't seen noticeable improvement necessarily. But from a snapping standpoint, which was the major concern, you still have some issues, but it's not as prevalent as it's been in recent weeks. And so, as long as he's, I guess, moving in the right direction, that's big time too. But what you can't do, Alabama has some natural advantages due to the home field and, all those different things. Obviously, Tennessee's offense is out there and the crowd's going crazy. They got a lot to deal with. So you have the issues offensively that Alabama and Tennessee currently have, but Tennessee has to stack that on top of having to deal with a hostile environment. And so I think that is, something that Alabama will try to take advantage of. But yeah, the offensive line is obviously the biggest concern. And if they're not able to hold up enough, I mean, you give Tennessee, you'll take the crowd out of it quick. You give Tennessee a really good opportunity to win this football game.
Yeah, and another thing about this offense and going back to the running back position last week the was the presence of 4 guys legitimately in the mix. It wasn't really a situation where you ever felt like Alabama was in such command of the game that it was like, let's get our top 2 guys out and let's get some other guys some work. There was obviously a plan to go 3 or 4 deep, which they did against Arkansas. And that kind of leads us to everyday American talking about the stretch run with Jam and how he was able to carry that out on really an outside zone that they had some success with. And I think that goes back to if it isn't going to be more of Jalen Milroe in the run game, there's going to have to be more variety in how Alabama goes about using its backs. And I thought we saw that last week. We still saw split zone, inside zone, but we saw some gap scheme type of runs with the pullers, even the tight ends getting out in front and some counter action stuff. And then off the outside zone, you got a guy like Jam Miller that can certainly do damage with his speed. I wonder though, how realistic is that to go another week and script in or write in four guys that get opportunities? I think part of it too is, these coaches understand you're getting into the deep end of the pool of the season when you better have depth ready to go at certain positions. And I think running back is certainly maybe at the top or near the top of that list.
Yeah, I thought Alabama did a better job of attacking outside when Jam Miller and Justice Haynes were in there, and I think that they bring a different element as far as their. And this isn't to take away anything from Jace McClellan or Roydell Williams. They've both ran really hard this year. They're good running backs. They're reliable. They don't put the football on the ground. They've had struggles, or at least Jace McClellan has in pass protection, but in years past, he's been pretty reliable. And so you feel like the fact that he's a veteran player, you can trust him in those situations probably more so than others. And I did think it was interesting that late against Arkansas, when the Razorbacks were able to kind of close the gap, you saw Alabama condense the running back rotation back to just two guys. Part of that's going to happen. I mean, it doesn't matter if you've got, I think even in years past when they've had a consistent 4-man rotation or 3-man rotation at the position, when you're in kind of crunch time, you want to go with the guys that you can trust that can get the job done. And you don't want a guy who's not as proven like a Jam Miller or a Justice Haynes, a true freshman, making some sort of young player mistake that ends up costing you the football game. And so that's kind of natural. But I think that both guys did well. I think when Alabama probably the coaching staff went back and watched the film, they probably saw some good things. And I think you're going to continue to see them be a part of this rotation because they, like I said, bring something a little bit different. And, I think Alabama they need more of that, where it's like you said, variation. I think they've been way too set in how they operate offensively at times. I mean, I would even say like a good representation of that. I've been looking back at the first play of the game, what was called, compared to past offensive coordinators. And I've been going back through and kind of grabbing clips of all the first plays just to kind of show some comparison. I got some Lane Kiffin with Jalen Hurts in 2016. I got some, Brian DeBall in 2017 with Jalen Hurts. I got, so I'm kind of working through it, but it's been pretty interesting because Tommy Rees has been very vanilla on that front. And I think that that's kind of carried over into other, situations as far as game script is concerned. And when you get off game script as well, I think that that's kind of affected things. And I'll be curious to see how he kind of changes moving forward.
It's like changing the eye level in baseball if you're a pitcher. If you got 3 or 4 guys, you got 3 or 4 pitches and they sort of complement the others effectively. And now you're pitching. You're not just throwing. And I think for Alabama, offenses maybe in the first half of the season were able to look fastball a lot of times with Jace and Roydell. Now you start mixing in some guys that they don't have a lot of tape on, guys that they haven't seen as much of with Jam and what he brings to the mix. And Justice is kind of an all-around guy, and maybe you can dictate a little bit more in the run game than what we've seen from Alabama to this point. Hey, Josh Batchelor, he wants to talk defense. Do you think, he asks, we will see more of Trez or Jihad at weak side linebacker this week with their pace of play? Talking about Tennessee's. Josh says he leans towards Jihad, but Josh likes Trez's pass rush and what he's been able to do and getting pressure. I think Alabama's done a better job this year for sure, sort of timing things up. And even going back to the spring game, that was one of the more encouraging things that I saw back in April was that, and they worked on it. Even in the spring game, they were bringing some of those inside linebackers through those A gaps. And it seems to have translated nicely. It's an interesting question, though, and we'll bring our guy, by the way, Jimmy Stein, on here to help us with this one. There he is.
Hey.
Jimmy, how we doing this evening?
Good. You guys?
You jumped right in here as we're talking inside linebacker play. First of all, great to see Deontay Lawson back out there the last few games playing at a high level. But the other guy, whether it's Jihad Campbell, whether it's Trez Marshall, who there's been some questions about his health this week. I think if it comes down to that, you go with a fully healthy Jihad Campbell. Now, if Trez is truly good to go, Yeah, I think perhaps that's a series by series thing that you consider. And Jimmy, I'll start with you on that.
Trez may have played his best game before being injured against Arkansas. I thought he was, he's so dynamic on that blitz. Alabama hadn't really had an inside linebacker as good as he is, I think, in terms of getting to the quarterback on that blitz. Just a veteran presence, a little bit like Deontay. He can play traffic cop out there. Real agile athletically. But Jihad brings a little something different to the table. To me, Jihad is a physical presence, maybe unlike what Alabama's had in the middle of the field. So I'm with you, Travis. I think if Trez if Trez is 100% healthy, I think it's almost situational in terms of when you see Trez versus when you see Jihad. If it's up to me, I mean, I like Jihad in some circumstances, Trez in others. I think they're both outstanding. I think they've both had really good years. And it's a tribute to the Alabama inside linebacker coaching staff, because I think it's more than one guy doing it, frankly. I think it's a tribute to them that every inside linebacker they put on the field this fall looks ready to help and is an impactful player. But to answer that great question, I lean more towards Trez due to his veteran presence and him coming off what I thought was his best performance, but I have zero hesitation in playing Jihad Campbell.
Yeah, it's again, we talked about this, Clint and I earlier. Tennessee makes it tough to go situational because they're
Yeah.
working at pace.
Fastball.
So subbing is going to be precious. When you get those opportunities, you've got to be ready to go and have those guys in line. So we'll see how Alabama handles that in this one. And by the way, your inside linebackers better bring it this week because Jalen Wright doesn't go down easy. He reminds me a little bit of a Kerryon Johnson, that type of back. Physically, you look at him, he's impressive, but he runs even bigger than his size would indicate. Jabari Small is compact, powerful. Dylan Sampson is very capable. Clint, you better bring something with you to the party because Tennessee wants to get that box thinned out and then get you isolated with those backs. And they feel comfortable that they can win those one-on-ones. And, for the big guys up front this week too, to me, it's more about gap integrity. You can't go rogue and try to play hero ball and jump out of gaps because Tennessee loves to hit you with cutbacks in the run game. And then you got a real problem.
Yeah. If you're asking who I think is going to start at will, I'm going with Justin Jefferson. No, I'm kidding. Obviously, I'm still
He's a fan.
I'm still recovering from that preseason
fan.
prediction.
He's in the fan club.
So if you're asking me to, obviously I've had some swing and misses at that position already, but I feel like this is a game where you're going to see a ton of Trez Marshall. I really do. And the reason being is because it's one of those closer games. You're expecting it to be close. And you, in those types of situations, kind of want to rely on your veteran guys. Marshall's playing great football right now. He's a good run stopper. Tennessee's obviously a great rushing offense. And not only that, but I think from gap responsibility and just run fits and things like that, Jihad Campbell has made tremendous strides in that area. But I still think that there is growth that needs to be had. And with Trez Marshall, I think he's got a great feel for how to play the position, being in the right place at the right time. And so against this style of offense, and the fact that I think from a coverage standpoint, Squirrel White's going to be a problem inside, certainly. And they've got some other guys that can cause some issues as well. But I think that, you can kind of mask some of those deficiencies based off of what Tennessee is offensively this year compared to last year. And if you can do that, then I think Marshall this just feels like a game where you can trust him a little bit more. And I think that that's going to be a crucial factor in all this. You're definitely going to see Jihad Campbell, but I wouldn't be shocked at all if it was like a 75-25 type of split, 70-30, that kind of thing. And, with what Marshall brings as far as being able to pressure the quarterback, that's certainly been big. And so, you've got some deficiencies in coverage. He's a little bit stiff, a little bit limited, not quite Shane Lee in that regard, or even close for that matter. But, when you're getting the other elements, you can kind of work around if there's something that an off-ball linebacker doesn't do necessarily well, if you have a player like Deontay Lawson playing next to him.
And we talk about pressuring Joe Milton potentially. And it seems like with both these quarterbacks, there's this narrative that they are elusive. And I don't really see it as much. I think the thing you want to prevent with both is limiting how many opportunities they get to leave the pocket and get downhill and straight line runs for both Jalen Milroe and Joe Milton. These aren't Charlie Ward type of guys. I know I'm severely dating myself with that
Tell me what
analogy
you
there.
think.
Google Charlie Ward, and you'll see what I'm talking about. Jimmy knows. Jimmy's always got me.
So these
front.
quarterbacks are the Derrick Henrys of
yes, I think so. Yeah, and I know when I made the comparison of Jalen to to the guys that I've compared him to, Josh Allen, the Bills. That's why, because Josh Allen is a hell of an athlete, but he's a hell of an athlete at 6'5", 240. Not that Jalen's that, but kind of similar in how they can hurt you running the football. And so, what do you think from that standpoint on 3rd and 8, 3rd and 7? And we talked about this with Clint too, Jimmy. And we both don't envision Tennessee just totally getting away from the run on 2nd and 3rd and long. It kind of puts you in a bind if you're either of these defenses, really.
Sure. Tennessee just so different than they were a year ago. I think last year on 3rd and 7, 3rd and 10, they're just as dangerous as they were on 1st and 10 or 2nd and 2. I mean, when they spread it out and could run as many vertical routes as they would from multiple players, often on the same snap, they were just a real scary team in terms of how they would attack you. And whether it was 3rd and 10 or 1st and 10 didn't really matter. This year, much different. If Alabama can get Tennessee in 3rd and long, you got to like Alabama's chances because Milton's just not quite as scary. I don't think even as a runner, he's got a big arm, but he just hasn't been as effective or efficient throwing the ball down the field. But as a runner, like you just point out, Travis, he's not a make you miss guy. He's just really what amounts to a fullback. But he can be effective running the ball. Just he is athletic for his size. He will run you over. You better hit him low. Terrion, don't go in high like you did with KJ, last week.
Similar challenge this week that you got last week.
They're to me sort of similar players. I give a nod to KJ in terms of, I think KJ's a better player, to be honest, but they're sort of similar. I think KJ might be a little more athletic, but the big strong thing, the big arm, the athleticism to a degree, sort of similar. Joe just hasn't been able to put it all together as a passer. I think the biggest difference in this game to me, almost, guys, is from last year's the 3rd and long. Like I said, 3rd and 10 meant you could lose the game on the next snap. 3rd and 10 this year, Tennessee might lose the game on the next snap.
And we look at these two offenses and you look at how well Tennessee runs the football. Again, not a great touchdown conversion rate when it comes to red zone. And similar to a week ago when you wondered about those two teams, Arkansas and Alabama, who will be more efficient in the red zone, who will have to maybe lean more on place kicking. I think Alabama feels good about that, but obviously wouldn't like to do that too much. It wasn't much of a problem last year. Well, I mean, you had so many explosive play touchdowns last year that red zone wasn't much of a problem for Tennessee regardless. But Speed RTR right here in our comments, Clint, with Alabama's struggles on OL being a theme, why hasn't both quick and slow screens been more utilized? Seems like the pass plays often are longer developing. I think Speed RTR is onto something there.
Yeah, it's definitely something that I think we can all agree on that they should be utilizing more. Now, going back and watching some of the early stuff, like against MTSU, from the first play of the game, there was a quick screen to Isaiah Bond. I thought it was a very well-designed play. It had some success, but Isaiah Bond had to dip down to be able to catch it. And I think the closer to the line of scrimmage that you get, the more problems that you have as far as Jalen Milroe's mechanics and accuracy. And so I think maybe and I'm speculating here. I don't know if this is the case because I've been asking the same question myself. Why aren't they doing this more? It makes no sense. If teams are teeing off on you in certain situations, try to catch them off guard. If they're sending a bunch of run blitzes, screens and stuff would be effective against that kind of thing. And you're just not seeing it. And my only guess at this point. Either it's like, for lack of a better word, incompetency at offensive coordinator, which I do think that Tommy Rees has been limiting in some ways. I also think he's very handcuffed in what he can run, but I don't think that he's to the point where he doesn't understand that that would be an effective strategy to utilize. I think more so it's, in those types of plays, it's not just running a play to run a play to try to get them to back off. If you have success doing it, then that's when the defense starts backing off and it starts, they have to change how they're playing you. If Milroe's not putting the football, not only if he can't get it to the guy, but if he's having trouble placing it in a way where the receiver can create yardage after the catch, and you're not, it's not very successful, then maybe you don't feel comfortable running that stuff. That's the only thing I can think of. It certainly could be something else that I'm not thinking of, but it's a great point, and you would certainly like to see them implement a little bit more of that if possible. But I also will say we've been talking about more design quarterback runs, and we haven't seen that to this point either. Could be injury related, or it could be, just the fact they don't want to do it. But regardless, I feel like there are multiple things that these guys could be doing to kind of help themselves, and they're just not doing it. And I think there's a reason for that.
Yeah, Jimmy, that's been my thought after about 5 or 6 starts now for Jalen Milroe, is it must be something they're just not comfortable with, or it's
Right.
something that maybe Jalen's not comfortable with. And that's the only thing I can come up with, because how many years in a row has the quick game been a central piece to the Alabama offense? Not the Tommy Rees offense, not the Lane Kiffin offense or Sark offense. The Alabama offense, going through various offensive coordinators, has had that quick game component. This one, it's almost nil. Now, if you consider the second half of Texas A&M and what we saw Alabama come out and do in the third quarter of that game as the quick game, that's fine. That to me was more of a controlled passing attack. That was almost West Coast in nature is what it felt like. But to Clint's point and to our viewers' point, I'm talking about smoke screens, getting the ball out quick. But you know what else we don't really see much of either? Are jets, jet sweeps, easy touches. You got guys like Bond and Prentice and these guys that can run. And I'm not the biggest jet sweep fan in the world, okay? But I understand how it can add to the stress that a defense is experiencing. And when you go back and watch Tennessee's game against Florida a month or so ago down in Gainesville, give Napier and that offensive staff credit, because they came out and did some of that stuff. They got east-west early, gave Tennessee some different things to look at, then got Etienne going the way they wanted to get him going. What do you think about all that, Jimmy?
Well, as far as the screens go, again, we can only guess because we've seen so little of it. But just in terms of, to me, what logically is the answer is they've tried this in practice and it doesn't look good or doesn't work well. That's what makes the most sense to me. Like, why doesn't it work well? When you're throwing screens, there's so many different types of screens, whether smoke screen, bubble screen, wide receiver screen, the little toss to the running back. And one guess I have here is, Milroe, to me, in terms of what type of quarterback he is, in terms of what he's really good at, and we see this with the deep ball, he's sort of a fastball guy. When Milroe's got to put a ton of effort in a throw, whether it's a deep throw, whether it's a high velocity throw, that to me is him at his best. He's a fastball pitcher. That's what he can do. That's what got him recruited. Not everybody's got that arm that he's blessed with. But I think, in terms of what I would call the off-speed pitches, the changeup, the curveball, the sinker, the repertoire of pitches isn't there for him yet. And I'm wondering if maybe on some of these screens, there's not quite as much confidence. And I'm not even just talking about accuracy. I think we have all seen a lot of football to realize that if you float a screen and it's just floating up there against SEC speed, that's not just a problem, it's a pick six.
Yeah.
And I think that maybe, and again, this is a guess on my part, that maybe they're just not really comfortable with making those tight throws around the line of scrimmage where you're not just talking about a disaster, you're talking about, the other team's band is playing, when you really mess that up. But hopefully it's something that can be added. I've talked about since the beginning of handing the job to Milroe back in week 4 or week 4, that you start with a base and then you add to it. And hopefully he can keep up with that. Each week you're just adding stuff until you've eventually got a really thick play sheet over there. And hopefully it's something they can add as he gains confidence and gets better and better. Because I see a kid that's getting better and better and better. Improvement's never linear, but he is getting better. Maybe that's something they can add late, because I think it'd be super effective.
Yeah, the traditional screen game. Sorry, Clint.
That's okay.
There's other things involved there too. I mean, you got coordination with the offensive line. We can look at that group and speculate that they've never been, as I can recall it, a big running back screen team with Nick Saban, unless you're talking about swinging it out to TJ Yeldon in Baton Rouge in 2012. That one obviously stands out down in Red Stick, but year in and year out, especially in the last 6, 7, 8 years, they've been more perimeter oriented with the quick throws and trying to win with one. And you know what else they haven't been the last couple of years? A really good perimeter blocking team.
Right.
I mean, you can say what you want about Judy and Devontae and all that. Those guys blocked for each other. They got after it as perimeter blockers. I haven't seen that as much of late. But Clint, as we let you go here, we've already held you over, man. You're going to get OT on us if we don't watch out. Tim won't like that. Any departing thoughts as we let you get out and look ahead to this game Saturday?
Yeah, I think that you brought up a great point with the Jets, because we saw so much of that early on in football games and with previous offensive coordinators. I mean, just going back and looking at those first play of the games, it's Calvin Ridley, it's Ardarius Stewart. They're getting the manufactured scripted touches early, letting them get east and west, and it's a change of pace, and that shouldn't be overly difficult. I mean, if you can't do get the receiver the ball on a jet, I mean, you've got a big problem. And I don't think that Milroe is incapable of that. So I don't know why they're not utilizing that stuff more, but you need to see more variety. Part of me thinks that it's just Tommy Rees feels so limited. Like Bill O'Brien was limited as far as his offensive line. It handcuffed what he could call or do offensively. I don't think fans realize enough how much it did in 2021. Tommy Rees in some ways is dealing with the same problem, but on top of that, he's got a quarterback that can kind of compound some of those issues. He hangs onto the football too long. He takes unnecessary sacks when he could throw the football away. He's prone to, sometimes make decisions that you want back. Bill O'Brien at least had a quarterback, a Heisman winning quarterback, who could compensate for a lot of that. Pocket awareness was elite. His ability to improvise, his ability to get on the move. He was able to overcome a lot. And so I think Rees has gotten a little bit too limited, thinking that he's limited. And what you would like to see him do is just expand that a little bit more. And if he can do that, I think that he ends up having this offense ends up having quite a bit of success down the stretch this year. But there's a lot of problems that need to be fixed, and hopefully it starts on Saturday. But boys, I appreciate you having me on. It was good talking football with you guys, and we'll talk soon.
Enjoyed it, Clint. Thanks so much for joining us on TNT once again. Look forward to your continued coverage with us right there at BamaOnline.com. Talk soon. Thanks, Clint. There goes Clint Lamb checking out on a Thursday night. We kind of continue that conversation, Jimmy, and it may have something to do with how defenses are playing Alabama now, right? I mean,
Sure.
Let's talk about the receivers, because with Judy and Devontae and Ruggs and Waddle and Mechie and JMO, there was a respect that had to be paid to those guys. So the type of coverages that you saw with those guys, probably different now. Not that Jermaine Burton hasn't been productive in stretches, not that they don't have some quality guys, but when you're elite across the board like Alabama was, you're damn right early in the game we're going to play off coverage. And if you guys want to run jet sweep for 7 yards to those guys instead of hitting us over the top, more power to you.
Yeah, and with the Milroe only making he's got 6 starts this year, 1 start last year, so 6 or 7 career starts. The least experienced starting quarterback in the SEC. It makes all the sense in the world, Travis, for defenses to play Alabama and say, we want Jalen Milroe, if they're going to beat us, they're going to beat us with him throwing the football. They're not going to beat us handing it to those backs that we know are quality players. They're not going to beat us with running their quarterback. They're going to beat us with Jalen Milroe throwing the football. I think a recipe for lack of success at Alabama is just literally number of attempts. I mean, for instance, if you told me right now, before the game started on Saturday, Travis, that Jalen Milroe threw the ball 40 times against Tennessee, I would tell you that's a loss. They were behind. They were behind. They had to throw it too much. 30 attempts would be, I don't know. I don't think that's Alabama's recipe right now. I think somewhere in the 20s is nice, and that's enough. But Tennessee wants Alabama to throw it more. Alabama wants a little more. No, we're going to run it first and complement that with the downfield shots. But Alabama is defended, I think, in that manner where you're sort of being invited to throw it. But he has dinged teams enough, Travis, downfield to where you have to be wary of it at least a little bit. I mean, no one's just going to give him the back third. No one's going to hand him that. But at the same time, you're like, hey, if you want to operate in the intermediate area, give it a shot. But we're not going to let your backs run for 250 yards, because if we can put it on that right arm of the young, inexperienced, mistake-prone quarterback, then that's what we're going to do.
Jalen Milroe in SEC play is averaging 10.9 yards per attempt. I didn't have
That's
that
great.
back in the preseason.
No, that's great.
Especially when you consider that Jaden Daniels is averaging 11.4, and he's just having an otherworldly type of season.
He could win the Heisman. He could win the Heisman with that number.
Daniels' campaign comes down to probably Tuscaloosa in a couple weeks. And then if he can win that game and LSU can get back to Atlanta, then he gets another opportunity in the SEC championship game in front of Heisman Trophy voters. But you talk about thresholds, and we talked about this with Clint earlier. You look at Tennessee's only loss of the season. It got off just 30 runs against Florida. That was season low, 30 runs. So those numbers to keep in mind, right? I know you talked about it with Jalen, and if he gets up into the mid-30s or more in pass attempts, probably not a good sign for Alabama. But I guess you could look at that with Tennessee too, as far as the number of runs the Vols are able to squeeze off in this one.
No, that's exactly right. I mean, Alabama sort of needs to defend Tennessee the same way. I mean, if Wright and Small have their typical games, Alabama's in a little bit of trouble. I mean, you're going to have to force Joe Milton to be the reason they win the game with his arm, completing passes down the field, because you've sort of taken away that run, or at least limited it. The numbers to me, you already talked about that Florida game. I mean, Florida held Tennessee to 100 yards rushing. If Alabama does Saturday, that game's over. I mean, that's the way I look at it. If Alabama holds Florida to 100 yards rushing, then Milton's got to make up for that. I mean, I know football's very complicated. It's also very simple. And one of the most simple things I say, boy, this isn't even 101. This is remedial stuff. But there's only two ways to move the football: on the ground and in the air. That's the only two ways. It's the only ways you get production. It's the only ways to get points: on the ground or in the air. Tennessee wants to do this on the ground. That's where they're really good. If you limit it, if you hold them to 100 yards, they're probably going to need 300 yards, 350, 400 to win this game. You hold them to 100 yards rushing, there's only one way for them to get to 350 or 400. That's with 250 or 300 yards passing. And so far, that just hasn't looked like a great recipe for Tennessee. And that's going to be the challenge for Alabama is limiting Wright and Small. They're going to get some yards, but Florida did it, and I am sure they have poured over that tape in Malmore, at the Malmore this week.
When you look at those three Tennessee backs, Wright's really the guy that it's translated with into SEC play as far as yards per carry. Jabari Small, Dylan Sampson, it's not bad. It's 4+, but it's not 5+ like it is with Jalen Wright. So with that stat in mind, I'm going to ask you this question. Most important player for the Alabama defense in this game Saturday, who do you got there?
I wanted to say Malachi Moore, because I think his physical presence at star, Alabama will be a nickel almost the entirety of this game. And we already alluded to the fact that playing a fastball offense, you can't substitute as much. Alabama very likely, I think, in this game to go with nickel, stick with nickel. Last year against Tennessee, you almost had to go with dime, stay in dime because of the way they spread it out. But now it's probably a little more nickel. I want to say Malachi, but I'm not. I'm going to go more almost old school and say Deontay Lawson, in the sense that he's the presence in the middle. He's the one that gets everybody lined up in the run fits. And I think if there's one player that is sort of in charge of stopping the inside run, it's Deontay, both as a playmaker and as the line caller. So I think it's Lawson because, again, it's the, you already what Wright's like at 7 yards per carry Wright's at 7 yards a carry, Small's at over 5 yards a carry. You can't have that. You can't have that on Saturday. You will lose the game. So to me, it's Deontay Lawson, though I wanted to say Malachi at star. We're not 100% sure that he's going to play even, but if he does, he would also be very valuable because he's the DB on the field that can most influence the run game. Caleb Downs too, but Malachi at star I think is important. But my answer is Deontay.
Yeah, I like both those guys. Deontay, for some obvious reasons. They love to put linebackers in conflict. They'll try to get Deontay and Trez or Jihad running sideline to sideline to start with. And they do that just so they can start trying to gut you with the inside run between the hashes. At some point, they want to get you really in a tough spot. I'll go with the bigs. I don't know if there's just one that I would pick. But as I said earlier, this is a gap integrity type of game up front. Tim Keenan, Jaheim Otis. When you play Justin Aboigbe inside some, if you're able to get into that kind of look, Damon Payne as well. I think the true big dudes this week have to hold it down because Tennessee was light on its offensive line at Florida too in that loss. Didn't have a couple starters. I think Mays was out. Maybe Mincy didn't start at tackle. Mays is back now. He's an integral piece to their interior offensive line. So you need those inside guys to be legit against this Tennessee run game. And if you do that, then Deontay Lawson and Trez and even your nickel, if it is Malachi Moore, maybe it's Terrion Arnold. And I think you're right about Malachi and his value, because if he can play and you can keep Terrion outside to go along with Kool-Aid, then you can challenge those Tennessee receivers, I think, this time around. You might give up a play or two. You're not going to get torched like you did last year. And then with Malachi maybe freed up a little bit more to help against the run, that's where you could see that impact. If he can't go and you're playing Terrion inside, I think Terrion will be okay at star. But you're going to feel as good about maybe manning up Trey Amos? That's where the question, I guess, comes in a little bit.
No, that's exactly right. And it's a different Tennessee wide receiver core, no doubt. I mean, I know that their X's and O's are bothersome to say the least, but last year they filled out those X's and O's with some pretty good Jimmys and Joes. They're not quite as good to me outside as they were a year ago, and I don't know that they got those dudes that can just fully take advantage of Alabama's coverage in the middle of the field. I do think Alabama is pretty good there. But of course, you got a freshman at one safety spot. You got the UAB transfer at the other safety spot. It's not like they wouldn't take their shots again if they had the same crew and the same quarterback back. I'm just not sure they're equipped for it, but they're equipped for something else. It's the fastball and it's running. I call it, they hurry to run. They hurry to run. They want to go fast.
Spread.
Yeah. They want to go fast and hope that you line up wrong and don't have gap discipline because of the speed at which they're playing. And that's what's going to be a huge challenge for Kevin Steele and T-Rob and the Alabama defensive brain trust is how can we maintain gap discipline while playing fast? But I think Alabama's better equipped to deal with it this year. Yeah. And I think Tennessee's not quite as equipped. That's why, hey, Tennessee might win this game. They might. but it's not going to be 52-49.
Yeah, I think that, all due respect, Byron Young, really nice season last year. Was happy to see him have that on his way out. DJ Dale, really solid player, but when you're talking about true anchor types that should be able to hold it down on the interior, Tim Keenan, the way he's playing right now, Damon Payne, not much flash to his game, but I think he can hold up. And then, of course, Jaheim Otis as well. Those are three guys I think you feel really good about going into this contest. Kenny Grant here in the comments says Caleb Downs is his pick, his most important play. Could be. I mean, if you're a safety in this game, you got to help limit those explosive plays, not just in the passing game, but there are going to be some runs that get a little bit out of the gate, and it's going to be on Downs and Jalen Key to keep those things from hitting the paint, which is going to be important because I think if you can make Tennessee at least play red zone offense and shrink the field and, kind of put it more on Milton to throw the football, then you can have some success down there on that end of the field. A lot of interesting matchups in this game, and we talk about all of them, and then we don't really get into the kicking game all that much. Although if I thought about an advantage for Alabama in this game, not that Tennessee isn't capable with its specialists, but you would think this is where both Will Reichert and James Burnip could prove especially helpful if it is in fact a close game on Saturday.
Well, both teams want to run the ball, so field position's big. Burnip can help you win and flip field position. Reichert helps you win drives inevitably bogged down. This is a good Tennessee defense. Again, not Tennessee in 2022. This is a completely different team. They're much better in spots they weren't good last year, and they're not nearly as good in spots they were very good a year ago. But overall, defensively, it's a much better Tennessee team. You can see Alabama moving the ball, but bogging down when the field gets condensed. That's where Reichert becomes extremely valuable. And you certainly like Alabama's advantages there in terms of the kicker-punter combination. And also in the return game, Kool-Aid sort of struggled fielding punts. Maybe he's dropped a couple. There hasn't been a big play. But to me, we know Kool-Aid's a good player. We know that, Travis. That's not like speculation. That's not hope. We know he can bust one, so he's going to. It's almost inevitable that Kool-Aid's going to make a big play as a punt returner at some point. And maybe that happens this weekend in games that are decided by one score, 10 points or less. Special teams is huge. I think it's an advantage for Alabama this weekend.
Yeah, Tennessee had some complimentary kicking game against Texas A&M last Saturday. Pinned the Aggies on their 1 yard line, forced a 3 and out. A&M has to punt from its own end line in the end zone. It's not a good punt, and Tennessee returns that punt for a touchdown. That was largely the difference in that
side of the game.
Yeah,
the side of the game.
Texas A&M. SK here in the comments as we wrap up, we get out of here. If UT hurries up and gets nothing running that speed offense, might backfire and put that UT defense on the field all day long. Maybe SK, Jimmy, is sensing a little Ole Miss 2021 in Tuscaloosa. Remember that one? That corral and that run game. And
grab your popcorn.
Yes. Yeah, grab your popcorn. And then I think Lane and the Rebels had the ball for 19 minutes, something like that.
It is true. They hurry to run, and then if you stop the run, then you get the ball back sort of quickly. I can see it being really a low scoring thing. I saw an expert on ESPN say as one of his picks of the weekend is the under in Alabama, Tennessee, just for that very reason. And I think it's very possible. I won't be shocked, Travis, if the score in this game is something like 17-10 or 13-10 or 17-13. Very possible. Lots of 3 and outs, lots of punts.
If there's not some non-offensive touchdown scenarios,
sure,
very much with you on that. The game's pretty clean, and there's not a lot of short fields, and the kicking games kind of do what it looks like they're capable of doing. Could be some long fields and some punting and perhaps some opportunities on fourth down for both these offenses. Well, Jimmy, we're going to get out of here. I think we've pretty much covered it from offense to defense to Special teams. Kenny, by the way, here says the crowd has to be on point too. So we've got the home field advantage covered. I would think that wouldn't be much of a problem for Alabama.
Not against
on Saturday
Tennessee.
afternoon.
And Nick Saban made a personal appeal on his radio show tonight for the fans to be a difference in the game.
Tennessee
and
fans
Alabama's
rushing the field after that win last year. Ooh.
Yeah, now it's Alabama's fans' turn not to rush the field. I don't want to see
that won't.
I don't want to see those goalposts in the Black Warrior. I don't. But what I would like to see is Alabama's fans making a difference on those 3rd and 10s. That the defense is going to do its part, getting Tennessee to 3rd and 10. Then the fans have to do their part.
Yeah, absolutely, Jimmy. It's been a lot of fun, my man.
Oh yeah, I love this show every Thursday. Already looking forward to next week, the off week show.
Absolutely. Good stuff with Jimmy Stein. Also, Clint Lamb helping us out as well. Travis Reier, thanking you for joining us right here on Thursday Night Tide on the YouTube and podcast homes for BamaOnline.com. Speaking of which, you need to hang out with us at BOL. If you're not a subscriber of Bama Online, you need to take advantage of the big game special we have going on right now, 50% off an annual subscription to BOL available to new subscribers right now. Be sure to check that out as well. Travis Reier, thanking you once again. Until next time, so long, everybody.